I first noticed the cat on a chilly autumn evening. It was a small, frail thing, its orange fur matted, ribs faintly visible beneath its thin coat. The poor creature sat at the edge of my driveway, staring at me with wide, wary green eyes as if deciding whether I was friend or foe. I had just returned from work, exhausted and ready to unwind, but something about the way the cat shivered in the cool air tugged at me. I wasn't the kind of person who normally took in strays. In fact, I'd never owned a pet before. But there was something heartbreaking about the way this little creature clung to the shadows, too afraid to come closer yet too desperate to leave. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "All right, buddy. Stay right there." I went inside, grabbed an old plate, and scooped some leftover chicken onto it. As I placed the dish on the ground and stepped back, the cat eyed me warily, then inched closer. I could hear its soft, rapid breathing as it cautiously sniffed the food. Then, as if realizing it was safe, it lunged forward and devoured the meal as though it hadn't eaten in days. From that moment on, it became a routine. Every morning, the cat was there, waiting on my porch. At first, it kept its distance, but with each passing day, it grew bolder, letting me sit closer as it ate. Eventually, it allowed me to scratch behind its ears, and soon, it began rubbing against my legs, purring softly. I started calling it Pumpkin, partly because of its orange fur and partly because Halloween was just around the corner. Despite Pumpkin's newfound trust in me, it was clear he had been through a rough time. His ears were tattered, and he had a small scar near his nose. I suspected he had been abandoned, left to fend for himself in a neighborhood that wasn't particularly kind to strays. The thought infuriated me. How could anyone leave such a sweet animal behind? One evening, as I sat on my porch with Pumpkin curled up beside me, I made up my mind. "You're not just some stray anymore, buddy," I murmured, scratching under his chin. "You're home." I went out the next day and bought a proper food dish, a small bed, and even a few toys. Since my HOA had strict rules against outdoor pets, I didn't officially adopt him, I just made sure he had everything he needed. He seemed happy with our arrangement, greeting me at the door each day like a loyal companion. But not everyone was pleased with Pumpkin's presence. A few weeks later, I noticed Mrs. Caldwell, one of the nosiest, most insufferable HOA members, staring at me from across the street as I refilled Pumpkin's food bowl. She was the kind of person who thrived on enforcing rules that no one else cared about, and the moment I saw her scribbling something onto her notepad, I knew trouble was coming. The next day, I found an envelope taped to my door. I frowned, peeled it off, and unfolded the paper inside. Subject: Unauthorized feeding of a stray animal. Dear homeowner, it has been brought to our attention that you have been feeding a stray cat on your property. As per HOA regulations, feeding stray animals is strictly prohibited. This rule is in place to prevent the spread of disease, ensure community cleanliness, and discourage unwanted wildlife. You are hereby required to cease all feeding of said animal immediately. Failure to comply will result in a fine and further action if necessary. Sincerely. I clenched my jaw. HOA regulations? Spread of disease? Unwanted wildlife? Pumpkin wasn't some feral pest, he was just a lonely, abandoned cat looking for kindness. And I had given it to him. As I folded the letter, Pumpkin rubbed against my leg, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. I sighed, crouching down to scratch his ears. "Looks like we've got a fight on our hands, buddy." I wasn't about to let some overzealous HOA board tell me I couldn't help a defenseless animal. But I knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. The moment I read the violation notice, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Of all the ridiculous rules the HOA had enforced over the years, this one had to be the most heartless. I wasn't running a business out of my garage, throwing wild parties, or leaving my trash cans out an extra hour. No, my crime was showing kindness to a stray cat. I wasn't about to let this slide. I stormed into my house, grabbed my laptop, and pulled up the HOA's rulebook. I scrolled through countless pages of regulations, searching for any mention of stray animals. And sure enough, buried between the section's unapproved mailbox colors and acceptable front yard decorations, I found it. Homeowners are prohibited from feeding stray or feral animals, as doing so may encourage their continued presence in the neighborhood. Encourage their continued presence? What kind of nonsense was that? Pumpkin wasn't a problem. He wasn't rummaging through garbage or attacking anyone's dog. He was a harmless, affectionate cat who had already been abandoned once. And now, the HOA wanted me to turn my back on him too? Not a chance. The next morning, I decided to be proactive. I marched over to the HOA office, determined to plead my case. The office was a small, unimpressive space attached to the clubhouse, with walls covered in community announcements, and a counter stacked with paperwork. Behind the desk sat Mark Hastings, the HOA president. He was a tall, balding man with a permanent scowl, and I had never once seen him smile. He glanced up as I approached. "Can I help you?" I pulled the notice from my pocket and slapped it onto the counter. "Yeah, you can explain why feeding a stray cat is such a crime." Mark sighed, as if he had been expecting me. "Mr. Carson, the rule is in place for a reason. Stray animals can be a nuisance. They attract more strays, which can lead to property damage, noise complaints, and potential health risks." I crossed my arms. "Pumpkin hasn't caused any problems. He's just a cat, and I'm not about to let him starve." Mark adjusted his glasses and leaned back in his chair. "Look, I understand you feel sorry for the animal, but rules are rules. If we allow one person to feed a stray, others might start doing the same. Then we have a bigger issue on our hands." I clenched my jaw. "So your solution is to punish people for being compassionate?" "It's not about compassion. It's about maintaining order in the community." I could feel my blood boiling. I wanted to argue, to tell him how absurd his logic was, but I knew it would be pointless. HOA presidents like Mark thrived on control. They didn't care about fairness, only obedience. Seeing that I wasn't getting anywhere, I exhaled sharply and turned to leave. But just as I reached the door, Mark's voice stopped me in my tracks. "Oh, and Mr. Carson? Since you failed to comply with the initial notice, a fine has been issued." I spun back around. "A fine? Are you kidding me?" He slid a document across the counter. I snatched it up and read it. "Violation: unauthorized feeding of a stray animal. Fine: $250. My jaw dropped. $250 for feeding a cat? This had to be a joke. "This is insane," I muttered. "There's no way I'm paying this." Mark shrugged. "Then it'll increase. The longer you refuse to comply, the more severe the consequences." I glared at him. "What happens if I don't pay?" "You'll receive additional fines. If the issue persists, the HOA has the right to escalate the matter to legal action." Legal action? Over a stray cat? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I wasn't going to give Mark the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. Instead, I folded the fine notice, shoved it into my pocket, and forced a tight smile. "Got it," I said. "Thanks for the warning." Then I walked out. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto my couch, rubbing my temples. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't afford to keep racking up fines, but there was no way I was abandoning Pumpkin. I glanced out the window, where Pumpkin was curled up on my porch, blissfully unaware of the battle being waged on his behalf. "Guess we'll have to be a little more careful, huh?" I murmured. That night, I adjusted my routine. Instead of leaving food out in the open, I started feeding Pumpkin behind my house, where nosy HOA members like Mrs. Caldwell couldn't spy on me. I even set up a small shelter for him in my backyard, a hidden spot beneath my deck where he could stay warm and safe. For a while, it seemed to work. No more notices, no more fines. Just me and Pumpkin, living in peaceful defiance of the HOA. But peace never lasts long when the HOA is involved. A week later, I returned home to find another letter taped to my door. My stomach twisted as I ripped it open. Second notice, final warning. Dear Mr. Carson, We have reason to believe you are continuing to feed a stray animal despite previous warnings and fines. As such, an additional fine of $500 has been issued. Furthermore, if this violation is not corrected immediately, the HOA will be forced to take further action. This may include contacting local animal control to remove the stray from the premises. Sincerely. I crumpled the letter in my fist, my heart pounding. $500. And now they were threatening to take Pumpkin away. I rushed outside and found Pumpkin waiting for me as usual, his green eyes full of trust. He had no idea that forces beyond his control were conspiring against him. I crouched down, stroking his fur as I whispered, "Don't worry, buddy. I'm not going to let them take you." But even as I said the words, doubt crept into my mind. The HOA had made their stance clear. They weren't going to let this go. And I had no idea how to stop them. I sat on my couch, gripping the crumpled letter in my hands. $500. That was more than just an outrageous fine, it was a threat. And the worst part? The HOA was now talking about calling animal control to take Pumpkin away. I felt a sinking sensation in my gut. I had no idea what would happen to him if they got their way. Would they take him to a shelter? Would he even be put up for adoption? Or, considering how overcrowded shelters were, would they just euthanize him? The thought made me sick. I needed to do something. Fast. First, I decided to reach out to a local animal rescue. I spent an hour scrolling through websites, looking for a group that specialized in stray cats. Finally, I found one, Paws and Whiskers Rescue. They had a mission to help stray and abandoned animals find homes, and their website even mentioned assisting with HOA disputes. I dialed the number and waited. A woman answered. "Paws and Whiskers Rescue, this is Linda." "Hi, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need some advice. There's a stray cat I've been taking care of, but my HOA is threatening to fine me and even get animal control involved." There was a pause, then Linda sighed. "Unfortunately, we hear this kind of thing a lot. Some HOAs have policies against feeding strays, but that doesn't mean you don't have options." I exhaled, relieved that someone actually understood. "What can I do?" "Well," she said, "first, if Pumpkin is comfortable around you, you might consider formally adopting him. That way, he's no longer a stray, he's your pet, and the HOA can't argue that you're attracting feral animals." I glanced outside at Pumpkin, who was curled up in his usual spot. Could I actually adopt him? I hadn't planned on it, but now, with the HOA coming after him, it seemed like the best way to protect him. "I need to get him to a vet first, right?" I asked. "Yes. A vet visit would be the first step, to check for a microchip, get him vaccinated, and make sure he's healthy. If he doesn't have an owner, you can officially adopt him." I nodded. "Okay. That sounds like a plan. I can recommend a few vets that work with stray cases," Linda said. "Some even offer discounted services." She gave me a few names, and I quickly jotted them down. Then she added, "In the meantime, you might want to document everything, any communication from the HOA, pictures of Pumpkin, proof that he's not causing any harm. If this turns into a legal issue, you'll want evidence on your side." That was solid advice. "Thank you, Linda. You have no idea how much this helps." The next day, I'd borrowed a pet carrier from a friend and lured Pumpkin inside with some treats. He was a little wary at first, but once I placed a soft blanket in there, he seemed to settle. The vet's office was about 15 minutes away, and during the drive, Pumpkin let out a few confused meows but didn't seem too panicked. When we arrived, the vet, a kind-looking man in his 50s, gave Pumpkin a thorough checkup. "Well," he said after a few minutes, "he's a little underweight, but overall, he looks healthy." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That's great. Can you check if he has a microchip?" The vet nodded, ran a scanner over Pumpkin's neck, and shook his head. "No chip. Looks like he's a stray." That sealed the deal. Pumpkin had no owner. No one was looking for him. No one was going to fight me if I decided to keep him. Would you like to start the adoption process? The vet asked. I didn't even hesitate. Yes. By the end of the visit, I had all the necessary paperwork. Pumpkin had his vaccinations, a clean bill of health, and, most importantly, a new home. As I drove back, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Pumpkin wasn't a stray anymore. The HOA couldn't claim I was attracting feral animals because he was legally my pet now. But I wasn't naive enough to think they'd back down easily. The next morning, I marched straight to the HOA office with a folder full of documents, Pumpkin's adoption papers, vet records, and printed copies of their ridiculous fine notices. Mark Hastings was sitting behind the desk, sipping coffee. His face twisted into an annoyed expression when he saw me. Mr. Carson, he said, setting his mug down. Back so soon? I placed the folder on the desk. I'm here to clear up this stray cat nonsense. Mark sighed. If this is about the fines, I already explained. I cut him off. Pumpkin isn't a stray anymore. He's my pet. I took him to the vet, had him checked, and adopted him. He's licensed and vaccinated, and I have every right to take care of him. Mark's eyes flickered to the folder, and I saw his lips press into a thin line. He flipped through the documents, his frown deepening. This changes things, he admitted reluctantly. That's right, I said. Your rule is against feeding stray animals. Pumpkin isn't a stray anymore, so your fines are invalid. For a long moment, Mark just stared at me. I could tell he was trying to find some loophole, some excuse to maintain his power trip. But he couldn't. Finally, he closed the folder and exhaled. Fine, he muttered. The fines will be dropped. I folded my arms. And the threat about animal control? Mark sighed. It's off the table. I let out a breath of relief. Good. I turned to leave but hesitated at the door. Then, just to twist the knife a little, I glanced back. Oh, and Mark? You might want to rethink the way you handle these things. Not everyone would have fought back. Someone else might have just let you take their pet. Mark didn't respond. I walked out of that office feeling victorious. I had fought for Pumpkin, and I had won. But deep down, I had a nagging feeling. The HOA never gave up that easily. This wasn't over. For a few days, I thought I had won. The HOA had backed off, the fines were gone, and Pumpkin was officially mine. I could finally relax, knowing he was safe. Or so I thought. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching Pumpkin lazily stretch in the last rays of the sun, I had no idea that everything was about to fall apart. Pumpkin had gotten used to his new routine. He'd curl up in his favorite spot under the porch swing, doze off, and then wake up to follow me inside for dinner. But that evening, something felt off. Usually, he'd greet me with a little chirp when I came outside. But tonight? Silence. I frowned and called out, Pumpkin? Nothing. I stepped off the porch, scanning the yard. My heart started pounding. He wasn't there. Maybe he had wandered off. But that didn't make sense. Pumpkin never strayed far, and he always came back by dinner. I checked the bushes, the driveway, even walked around to the backyard. Still nothing. A cold feeling crept up my spine. Something wasn't right. Then I saw it, a trail of tiny paw prints in the dirt, leading toward the street. My hands shook as I unlocked my phone and pulled up the security camera app. I had installed a camera on my porch weeks ago, mostly because of HOA nonsense. I tapped on the most recent recording and hit play. The footage loaded, showing my quiet porch. Pumpkin lay curled up in his usual spot, his tail flicking in the evening light. Then, at 7:42 p.m., a dark-colored SUV slowly pulled up in front of my house. I squinted at the screen. The driver stepped out, a tall figure in a gray hoodie. They moved quickly. Too quickly. They walked up my driveway, crouched low near my porch, and reached out toward Pumpkin. At first, Pumpkin didn't react. He was used to me picking him up. But the second that person grabbed him, Pumpkin freaked out. His body tensed, his paws flailed, and I could see him trying to twist away. But the stranger was strong. They shoved Pumpkin into a small carrier, slammed the doors shut, and rushed back to the SUV. The car sped off. The entire thing took less than 20 seconds. I felt like I was going to throw up. Someone had stolen Pumpkin. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mark Hastings' number. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Mr. Carson," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "What a surprise." My hands clenched into fists. "Cut the crap, Mark. Someone just took my cat." There was a pause. Then he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" I snapped. "That's funny, because my security camera just caught somebody grabbing Pumpkin and driving off. And I have a pretty strong feeling that this wasn't just some random theft." Mark sighed. "Look, Mr. Carson, the HOA has received multiple complaints about your pet. Some residents were uncomfortable with a stray roaming around, even if you claimed to have adopted it. The board had to take action." I felt my blood boil. They did this. I forced myself to speak, though my voice was shaking. "You had no right to do this. Pumpkin is legally mine. You can't just take someone's pet." "We didn't take anything," Mark said smoothly. "We simply reported the issue to the proper authorities." "The authorities?" I hissed. "Who? Animal control?" Mark didn't answer. But he didn't have to. I ended the call without another word and jumped into my car. I drove straight to the local animal control center. My mind was racing. If Pumpkin was there, I had a chance to get him back before anything bad happened. When I arrived, I practically ran to the front desk. A tired-looking woman glanced up. "Can I help you?" I took a deep breath. "I think my cat was taken here. Orange tabby, medium build, white paws. His name is Pumpkin." She frowned and started typing on her computer. "When was he brought in?" "Maybe an hour ago," I said. She scrolled through some files. Then her face changed. "We did receive a stray matching that description earlier this evening." My heart leapt. "Can I see him?" She hesitated. "Actually, he's already been transferred." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "What?" She gave me an apologetic look. "The shelter is overcrowded, so we sometimes partner with other facilities. He was sent to a different center across town." My hands clenched. "Where?" She gave me an address. Without wasting a second, I turned and bolted back to my car. The second shelter was nearly 30 minutes away. I floored it, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if I was too late? What if they had already put him down? I shook the thought away. No. I refused to believe it. By the time I pulled into the shelter parking lot, my pulse was hammering. I ran inside, breathless. A man at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I gasped. "I'm here for an orange tabby named Pumpkin. He was transferred from the other facility earlier tonight." The man frowned. "Hold on." He checked his computer, scrolling through records. I waited, my entire body tense. Finally, he nodded. "We have him." I almost collapsed from relief. "Where is he?" I asked. The man hesitated. "He's in the back, but there's a problem." I stiffened. "What kind of problem?" He sighed. "Since he was listed as a stray, he's scheduled for transfer out of state first thing in the morning. After that, he'll be placed in a different shelter, or adopted out." My breath caught. "You can't do that. He's my cat. Do you have proof of ownership?" "Yes." I practically shoved Pumpkin's adoption papers across the desk. The man skimmed through them. "Okay, this helps," he admitted. "But we still need to process everything properly." I didn't care. I just needed Pumpkin back. "Can I see him?" I asked. He nodded. "Follow me." He led me through a hallway, past rows of cages. The moment I saw him, my heart broke. Pumpkin was curled up in a metal cage, pressed into the corner. He looked terrified. His ears were flat, his tail tucked close, and when he spotted me, his eyes went wide with relief. "Pumpkin!" I breathed. His little body trembled, and he let out the saddest, most desperate meow I'd ever heard. I turned to the man. I'm taking him home. Tonight. The man nodded. Let me get the paperwork started. I reached through the bars and gently stroked Pumpkin's fur. I'm here, buddy, I whispered. I'm getting you out of here. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The HOA had messed with the wrong person. Pumpkin was safe. That was the most important thing. But as I held him in my arms, feeling his little body tremble against me, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The HOA had crossed the line. Finding me for feeding a stray cat was bad enough, but having him taken away? That was unforgivable. They thought they could get away with it, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. First, I needed proof. I already had. Security footage of the unknown person stealing Pumpkin. My phone call with Mark Hastings, where he practically admitted to the HOA's involvement. Adoption papers showing that Pumpkin was legally mine. Animal control records confirming that the HOA had reported him as a stray. I compiled everything into a neat little folder and made multiple copies. Then, I took to the community Facebook group. Most of my neighbors already hated the HOA. People had been dealing with their nonsense for years: unfair fines, ridiculous restrictions, and petty power plays. But stealing someone's pet? That was a new low. I made a post titled, "The HOA stole my cat. Here's the proof." I laid everything out. The security footage, the adoption papers, the recordings, everything. Within minutes, the post blew up. Comments started flooding in. They took your cat? That's insane! This HOA has lost its mind. How do we get rid of them? I never liked Mark Hastings, but this is a whole new level of evil. We need to take action. Neighbors started sharing their own horror stories. One woman mentioned that the HOA once fined her for leaving her garbage bins out 2 minutes too long. Another guy said they tried to tow his car from his own driveway. This wasn't just about me and Pumpkin anymore, it was about the entire community. And people were angry. The next morning, I took my evidence to an attorney. I wanted to file a formal complaint, and possibly a lawsuit, against the HOA for trespassing, since someone had entered my property to take Pumpkin. Theft, since they had no legal right to take him. Harassment, for the repeated fines and targeting. The lawyer's eyes widened as I explained everything. This is a solid case, he said. You're not just looking at a lawsuit, you might be able to get them removed. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. But I wasn't stopping there. I also contacted a local news station. I figured if the HOA wanted to play dirty, I'd shine the biggest, brightest spotlight on them. They were thrilled to cover the story. A local reporter even interviewed me, filming me on my porch with Pumpkin curled up in my lap. The headline? HOA accused of stealing resident's pet, community demands change. Once that story aired, things exploded. The news report put massive pressure on the HOA. Mark Hastings tried to do damage control, but the more he talked, the worse he made things. We were simply enforcing community guidelines, he told reporters. Stray animals can be a nuisance, and we had to take appropriate action. But people weren't buying it. Public outrage skyrocketed. Even non-residents started flooding the HOA's office with complaints. People were demanding Mark's resignation. Then, things got even worse for the HOA. Turns out, my lawyer had dug up some dirt on Mark Hastings and the board. They had misused HOA funds. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. They had illegally issued fines. Many of them had no legal basis. Mark had approved contracts with companies owned by his friends. That's called fraud. It was the final nail in the coffin. A week later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. The entire neighborhood showed up. Mark tried to talk his way out of it, but no one was listening. People were furious. One by one, residents voted him out. Then they voted to dissolve the entire HOA. It was one of the best moments of my life. Watching Mark Hastings pack up his things and leave was pure satisfaction. And as a final cherry on top, he was being investigated for financial fraud. After everything settled, life went back to normal. The HOA was gone, Pumpkin was safe, and my neighborhood felt free for the first time in years. Pumpkin, of course, acted like nothing had happened. He still lounged on the porch, chased bugs, and slept in his favorite spot on my bed. But one thing did change. Whenever I sat outside with Pumpkin, I noticed something strange. My neighbors had started leaving out bowls of food for other stray cats. And no one, not a single person, could find them for it.